two of the biggest companies in the dot-com bubble were called Ariba and I2.
Hmm.
And these weren't even dot-coms, but what they were called B2B. And this was a huge field. There even was a B2B magazine I remember getting because I had to study this. I was just starting in the industry. And B2B just meant business to business where companies would basically have these procurement auctions. So what Ariba's vision of the world was there would be like a corporate eBay. And this corporate eBay would be, where you could place huge orders and everything would be amazing. Obviously, this sort of never happened, but these companies had tens of billions in market cap, and people all across America were along them because they were supposed to be these high flyers. The stocks went up a lot. That's people literally called them high flyer or high flyers, and whether they called them dot coms, high flyers, whatever, they were just buying stocks because they were going up. And we see the same thing here. And people are surprised when they hear, oh, the CEO sold all his stock, or oh, there's a guy saying that these products actually don't do anything. These are the kinds of things that wake people up. They don't wake everybody up, but like you said, I mean, the flows kind of govern everything. If people want to make the stocks go up to 100, they will, but they need the money and the confidence to do so. And one thing about the dot-com bubble that was interesting for B2B and stuff like that is you had institutional backing.
Hmm.
We all went collectively crazy, and you had Fidelity buying these stocks, you had T. Rowe buying these stocks, and today you don't have that for quantum. People in the institutional investor community have sat there and said, "We're not funding this."
It's interesting you say that. And again, I didn't have a dog in this fight, except I did make money on the long side, and I've gradually sold off. But I was looking at Counterpoint Global. They're a fund within Morgan Stanley. They're run by Michael Mabusin and Alfred Rappaport, I believe. And I just looked at one of their funds, and I think it's a $4 billion fund, and they have a 5% exposure to IonQ. So I'm
Yeah.
uh,
Well, it's interesting. I know Morgan Stanley has a long position through their clients. I don't know if there's a bullish guy at Morgan Stanley that likes these
uh,
stocks.
it was I mean, the Counterpoint Global is kind of their forward thinking, super smart guys that manage a couple of funds, and the fund is active. So it's like people buy into the fund buys companies that they think will do well. And I mean, Mike Mabuson was quite a respected investor, but then I saw that he has a 4.5% position of his fund in IonQ, and they also wrote like this quite a long white paper on quantum computing in 2020, and I believe probably based on the basis of that they bought into these quantum stocks. I mean, they come with the Morgan Stanley, Counterpoint Global, branding and everything, so it's like they're being backed by MSIM. And then just September, they came out with another white paper on nuclear fusion, and it's just kind of confusing. These really smart investors who claim to be fundamental, value-driven
Well,
investors.
I think you're providing one example. Most of the investors I talk to on Wall Street think quantum is a scam. Most hedge funds are short it, and that's
Hmm.
why like IonQ, when they raise money, they don't raise it through investors. They raise it through Susquehanna, who takes a volatility warrant, which is highly unusual, as you may know, to sell warrants at a company that's worth $15 billion. A very bizarre thing to do. You're not wrong that there are some people who are bullish. I mean, that's totally true. But if you look at in general, like, I was a CEO of a publicly traded drug company, and
Hmm.
when we raised money, we didn't need to give warrants to anybody to induce them to buy. We had people who studied our drugs and said, okay, I like this drug, I don't like this drug, I like the management team, I don't like the management team, and we would raise money from people like Prudential or healthcare hedge funds like Perceptive or whatever, and they would study the company. But right now, Rigetti can't do that. Rigetti
Hmm.
doesn't have anyone who wants to buy their stock, so they use an ATM. And back in my day, the ATM was like the lowest quality type of way to raise money because it meant that you didn't have an actual fund who was willing to sit there and give you stock. You had to actually, hit the market live with your orders to raise money, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. It's kind of been normalized a little bit in this era, but it's a really like unbelievably low quality way to do things. You're supposed to get a banker like Goldman or Morgan Stanley go round up 10 or 20 fundamental investors, and they should be begging to get in the deal, right? They should be fighting. No, no, give me a million shares. No, give me a million shares. And then the banker has a hard decision to be like, listen, bro, I'm sorry. I only have to give you 100,000 shares, and you're getting zero because there's so many clients that want this. Not a single one of these guys has had that. QUBT, of all things, has been able to do financings, but they do them so deep discount, like they'll have a $20 stock and they'll sell equity at 15, and then the hedge funds just sell it off. And that's basically the way they've been raising money. So I think that in general, there hasn't been much bullishness on the institutional side. I will say BlackRock, as well has been somewhat bullish on these names. And then PsiQuantum raised money, as well in this field. So from investors. So I don't think it's like completely abandoned by investors. But again, you don't see that bullishness of like an AI field or something like that, where everybody's long and everybody's trying to get long. This is much stranger, and there
Hmm.
are tiny pockets of people who are long, and I know Counterpoint is one of those. I haven't talked to them yet. I'll try to chat with them. My guess is they probably view this the way you do, which is that this is a futuristic sounding thing. The futuristic sounding thing is going to get bid up by people who want futuristic sounding stocks. And again, this is back to game theory and musical chairs. I'd rather not play musical chairs with my money. It's for me, value investing represents, and I'm not saying, I just want to be clear that I'm not saying it's better or worse. There are people like Steve Cohen and others that have made fortunes, gigantic fortunes that I can only dream of, by guesstimating psychology of
Hmm.
investors. And psychology of investors is a great thing to gain if you have that skill. I don't have that skill. But for me, value investing allows me to sort of sleep at night knowing that like the companies I'm long, I know what their assets are, I know what they're worth, more or less. And the companies I'm short, I know what their assets are, I think they're worthless, and then I'm short. And in fact, one time, like I said, I finally recall hiring a guy from Vertex, one of the most successful biotech companies, who was a chemist, quantum physicist. And I was so happy because this was a time before cloud. And I was so happy that I hired Dr. Kalal because I said, I really want to build you a cluster for drug discovery. And I said, can I get you? We're going to get Cray. Cray was the place to go for supercomputers before this, or we're going to write our own software to do message passing amongst our cluster. And I said, how many computers do you want? How many do you need? I was really excited. I was a public company CEO. I had a lot of cash. I want to build something impressive and cool. And sorry, somebody called my phone. Can you still hear me?
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
telling a story. Great. I was telling a story about hiring this guy Adam, uh, and wanting to buy him a cool big cluster that could do compute. And he said he wanted one computer, one fast like Xeon processor. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, yeah, this is all I really need. This is a drug discovery expert at Vertex. And I'm telling you, as a drug discovery expert myself, it's not something that we really need. I think it's something that, science curiosity and science need are like two very different things. At companies like Anthropic and others, they're interested in the fringe and the outlier, but they're not actually going to do anything but buy TPUs and buy GPUs, because that's the future of compute. It's what's needed now for the problem needed now. And none of those companies, which are the vanguard of compute, is at OpenAI, Anthropic, um, companies like that, Google. And these guys are not interested in quantum compute for their AI projects. Otherwise, you'd see Sam Altman, who's invested in Oklo, was the CEO of Oklo, because he's got this really, in my opinion, sort of crazy belief that we're going to need so much energy for AI that we need nuclear plants now, and he's investing in nuclear plants. That's, to me, a wildly crazy thing. But that's his choice, and he's very rich and very smart. So see how it plays out. But he's not investing in quantum companies because he knows that even though he runs the biggest compute company in the world, he doesn't need quantum computers because they don't work, and they don't work for this problem. And I would say for quantum simulation, which is one area where quantum computers are promising, I think most people in the space think that that's coming really far from now, just due to the bandwidth and the RAM stuff, and configuring the quantum state for a simulation is not easy. And again, can you approximate? I'll give you an example. Like when you do Unity in drug discovery, we kind of have Unity for drug discovery, and Unity is a physics engine that works really well. And you don't actually need to do every many-body problem where you do every single calculation of every atom, because at the end of the day, most of the atoms in the basketball that are bouncing in the Unity program, most of those atoms can be abstracted, and they're not really that important. And so when we discover drugs, we sort of say, oh, hydrophobic pocket, put the hydrophobic residue in. A methyl group would work really well there, an ethyl group, let me try it. And then you actually do have to try it in real life. So the computer programs are largely toys, they're helpful toys, but even with in silico drug discovery, we don't really get a whole lot out of it. And if you want to know how it's done, the best way to learn about drug discovery is to read. There's a great journal called JMedChem, and in Journal of Medicinal Chemistry, you can sort of see the nuts and bolts of how people actually discover drugs. And I would just read that and see how you think quantum could actually be used in that process, because in that process, I would say like 5% of drug R&D is the chemistry side. I would say even that might be an overestimate. And then of that 5%, maybe 10% of that is the compute side. So you're talking about 50 basis points of the drug industry's R&D spend, which is a pretty small number. And I don't think you could convince me that quantum is going to actually move the needle here. I think it's interesting and worth paying attention to, but for now, I don't think too many drug companies are jumping up and down about it.
Thanks. I think my last point before I got to jump is, with respect to INQ specifically, just looking at some of the talent that has joined in the past 6 months. You have Marco Pistoia, who's the top, engineer at JP Morgan, oversaw their quantum program, join INQ. You have Rick Muller, who's actually the sitting director, at IARPA, which is the, tech arm for the intelligence community. He left his, sitting position there to join INQ. And then you have people like Dean Acosta, who's the, chief communications officer at Lockheed Martin, decided to join INQ. So I know you continually, state that this is a company that's going to zero. I guess my point is, why would all these, three kind of, people who are top of their field, independently wealthy, very well respected, why would they join INQ if this is something that, again, is a scam and going to zero? Because again, from my perspective, it's just not something they would do for a quick payday. I think, like me, they're just bullish on, quantum, the industry, and INQ is a clear leader. So would appreciate your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I wanted to see if ZT wanted to jump in, because he's a domain expert that has some knowledge maybe I don't. Do you want to address that, ZT, or I can try?
Yeah, so like the quantum ML kind of field is non-existent. I think Martin pretty much knows that
Well,
as well.
he didn't ask about quantum ML.
What was he asking about? Sorry.
Why does the talent? If you didn't hear the question, then I'll.
I could repeat
You
it.
can answer his question.
I can repeat it if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just pointing out that the past 6 months, just pointing out some of the talent that has joined INQ. Marco Pistoia, who's literally the top engineer, global engineer at JP Morgan. He oversaw their quantum program. He left to join INQ. You have Rick Muller, who is the sitting director at IARPA, which is the tech arm for the intelligence community in the U.S. Literally, oversees the tech program for the CIA and NSA. And then you have guys like Dean Acosta, who is the chief communications officer at Lockheed Martin. They all joined, left, those highly prestigious positions. They're all independently wealthy, well respected in their field. Why would they join a company like INQ if again, in your words, it's a scam, and all going to zero, within the next, year or whatever your timeline might be?
Because they can lobby government contracts. That's why.
They did it for the government contracts. Or acknowledging that, INQ has, possible headwinds, from government contracts in the future.
Not saying that the government will make any use of, any quantum computers or anything like that, but or even if those type of deals even are made, or if anything even comes to fruition of them. But yeah, that's pretty much why those guys left to go join those quantum computer companies.
I'd also state that, like, having run a publicly traded company and gotten a lot of like eminent people to join me, don't ever underestimate how much people like money and need money. If you can write a check for $1 million or $5 million to get a person to join your company, they'll often come aboard. It's surprising. Not everyone's as rich as you might think, and company like INQ is $20 billion of equity value, $3 billion on cash. So for them to give somebody 10 or 25 million, the same way Zuck is doing the same thing for AI talent, it's really nothing. And I think if you're INQ, you're sort of long on story and short on substance, and needing kind of people. Again, I'm not taking a position on the credibility of any of these people, by the way, because I think the most talented people in quantum are actually not at INQ. But with respect to these people, I'll assume that they're very good people, as you're pointing out. But I don't think that their presence merely suggests success. There were two. I don't want to speak badly of them because they're very nice people and friends of mine. But there was an AI company that spun out of Google. They didn't really spin out. They left Google to start their own AI company. They raised $300 million and folded. They didn't ship a single product. They had some of the biggest names in AI that you've ever heard of. Still didn't work. Business isn't always about having the people. I think you need the people, the leader, the product, the team, everything. And I think that IonQ has very little, if anything. One of the things that they're doing is buying other companies to show some amount of revenue and revenue growth, including companies that have nothing to do with quantum, like Space Company. And I think what they're doing is delaying. They're supposed to come out with the 100 qubit Fortier this year, and they pushed that to next year. So the company has this ambitious roadmap where they say they're going to wipe the floor with NVIDIA by 2027, which is pretty wild. Um, and they can't even come out with their 100-qubit computer, which would be still below where all the other players are. They couldn't come out with that on time. So I don't know how they're come out with their next milestones on time. And to me, like, as a technology company, when you don't actually meet, when you don't have revenue or earnings, it's fine. Like, I did biotech, so it's normal. We raise money from the capital markets, and smart people invest. IonQ raises money from market makers, which I've never seen in my life, because you'd think BlackRock would invest, or you would think, some hedge fund would invest, or somebody. But be that as it may, IonQ's had to go to Susquehanna, and they've raised a boatload of money from them, while Susquehanna does their hedging and all their stuff in the market. So in biotech, if you said you're going to delay, you missed your milestone, and you're going to delay it to next year, your stock usually gets cut in half because the shareholders say, "What the hell's going on? Why am I going to trust this management team if they can't actually deliver what they said they were going to deliver?" Especially if it's like this roadmap that's like contingent on them actually meeting these milestones one after another. Okay, I'm 100. Now I'm going to go to 500. Now I'm going to go to 1,000 qubits. Now I'm going to go to 10,000 qubits. That is like really important if you're running a race. The first checkpoint of the race that you actually meet it, and the first checkpoint of the race they lost, and now they have to integrate 8 companies. Again, my experience acquiring companies, which I've done many, many times, is doing 8 of them right away, like bang, 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 bang. I only saw one company do that called Valiant, and it's very hard to integrate companies when you buy them rapid fire because you have to get to know the people at these companies. You have to figure out who stays, who goes. You have to integrate ERP systems. Like, it's not a great idea to snap buy companies one after another. Now, if I had a crazy market cap and tons of cash and I had an overvalued stock, I might be tempted to do that too, just because I want to take advantage of my currency, which is my stock. But I still wouldn't want to do it so rapid fire because it's just hard to kind of know what the hell you even bought. And like, imagine buying a space constellation. What do you know about the space business? You got to buy this company and now run it. And like, you need to know the ins and outs of that business. It's not simple. There's a lot of, I'm sure, trade secrets and little things that you got to get to know. So how much time can you spend on that space business when you go ahead and buy another company and another company and another company? To me, it's nuts. And again, if they had lots of revenue, I'd say maybe. If they had lots of customers saying this is a great quantum computer, great. If they could run any algorithm that was interesting, I would say great. But my experiments on their 38-qubit machine, which is their biggest public machine, which is kind of sad, show, and again, you don't need their machine. You can simulate 38 qubits with no noise, and you still don't get anything useful. You could do that on a gaming GPU. So, to me, I mean, I'm not going to pay 22 billion for a gaming GPU. I'm going to pay 22 billion for a company with 2 billion in revenue, maybe a CRISPR company, maybe, I mean, something that's really exciting. Like Anduril, you could have bought Anduril for 22 billion a year or two ago. And you have got great management, almost like legendary management, and a business with real revenue and products that people are buying. That to me makes more sense. I'm not saying that quantum computing isn't exciting. I think it's exciting scientifically. But even if you assume it's exciting from a business perspective, which I can't understand, the problem then becomes like, what are you going to pay for it? Why would you pay 20 billion for it? I mean, if we don't know what the revenue is going to be, and there's other companies in this space, it's not just IonQ. Like you said, there's like 50 companies in the space. How could it be worth 20 billion? It's kind of like the dot-com bubble to me. But I know you're bullish, and we all have a right to our opinion, and I respect your opinion. I disagree with it, obviously, but it doesn't mean I hate you or I think you're stupid or any of that things. I try not to bring that stuff into the argument unless the other person does. So I appreciate respectful dialogue.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, Martin.
ZT, why don't you go ahead and I know you want to share some stuff.
Yeah, so basically the quantum ML field is like basically non-existent. There's like how many algorithms, Martin? Do you know?
Oh, there's 100 quantum algorithms. I mean, they all become Grovers. They're isomorphic to Grovers. So that's kind of the only issue with that. I mean, you can go to Quantum Zoo, Quantum Complexity Zoo, and other algorithmic lists, but like when you dig into it, they all are Grovers at the end of the day. There's also a sparse multiplication, matrix multiplication algorithm, which again is kind of spurious because you don't get a big speed up, and again, we know how to multiply matrices really, really well on GPUs, so it's not like we need this.
Mm-hmm. And then also like Netflix and Disney, like they're not investing in this at all for video rendering. Like they have no interest in this whatsoever.
Of course, yeah, nor does any of the big AI companies who are probably
Exactly.
major. But
Yeah.
you said you were an expert in PQC. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. So basically PQC is getting adopted at an incredibly rapid rate over the past year. Like I think it's 42% of like HTTP HTTPS like protocols now like adopted PQC. Apple adopted PQC. They've been adding it more and more into iOS. Um, they're probably going to end up building like some sort of like PQC based like Bitcoin wallet, I would imagine.
So you're
Fake
saying,
wallets.
so
Yeah,
this
go
is
ahead.
news to me, and I thought I kept on top of this stuff. You're saying 40% of HTTP has been upgraded to PQC? That's hard to believe.
Yes, over the past year,
How,
yeah.
where do you get that number from? That's super surprising to me.
I think it's mandated by like what is it now? Like what's it the government thing? CIST or NIST or whatever?
You're a PQC expert and you don't know what NIST is?
It's just a different, like the acronyms and all that.
All right, dude. Enough of this. I thought you were an expert. All right, AI.
Yeah, so I think it would be useful to kind of up level this, Martin. You and I are both professional investors. I think a lot of people that are invested on both sides of this are not professional investors. I think sometimes it's really helpful with a quantum stock or any security to kind of up level it to, if this were a company and this founder's in front of me and showing me what they have and what their roadmap is, what are they worth, right? And I think that instead of just saying, it's 0 or it's 22 billion, I happen to think closer to 0. It might be instructive for people who are not as well versed in valuation to talk about just how you think about that, right? Like like the Rigetti guys get you in a room and they're like, okay, and you and I both know we've invested in VC, right? There's value to an idea, there's value to a proof of concept. You kind of think about how that plays, how that comes into the market. I think it would be good to kind of up level this because I think maybe it's helpful for some retail investors who are long these things. Like, what is it worth, right? Because maybe the idea that it's 0 is just like insulting to them, or they like the idea, they know that there's something there. We agree there's something there, right? There's value. What is the value, right?
Yeah, I mean, mostly wanted to debate bulls, but we can give this 5 or 10 minutes. So I think that, I mean, discounting cash flow is, one way to look at anything. The CEO or the founder of IonQ is Chris Monroe, and he said in many, many podcasts, which you just type Chris Monroe on YouTube, that we're decades away. Peter Shor, who invented quantum computing in essence via Shor's algorithm, also says this. I say this. Scott Aronson says this. There's very few quantum people that are telling you that it's coming soon. You do hear someone like the CEO of IonQ saying something completely opposite of his very well-respected founder, saying that quantum in 2 years will beat NVIDIA, which Intel has not been able to beat NVIDIA. AMD has not been able to beat NVIDIA. It's very hard to beat NVIDIA. So that might be exciting you, but I think it's a lie, quite frankly. And I think just like the 2000 CEOs went to jail, he's playing very dangerously close to that line of what's just being optimistic and kind of like enthusiastic with what's fraudulent. Because I think if there's some email somewhere where Chris Monroe sent to the CEO, Damasio, hey man, this is not happening. We're not beating NVIDIA anytime, ever. Maybe 50 years from now on shores, but we're not beating NVIDIA for AI ever. Because I just think that's the case. ChatGPT will tell you that too. So I feel like that's really, really risky for him to say, as a CEO who's been jailed, quite frankly, that is not what you want to be saying in public. Maybe in private, I guess, but really, really crazy thing to say. So I guess in terms of value and what you're saying, how do you wrap your head around value in general? It's not easy. But
I mean, I would kind of look at it as there's kind of two sides to it, right? There's the market potential of the problems that quantum does solve. I agree with you that they're kind of narrow. You kind of make the case of specific niche problems. You could value those, right? And then you could come to some sort of a high multiple valuation against being the frontier of that and say
I've done
3 or
this.
5 or 10 years, right?
I've looked
That's
at
one side.
so yeah. Let me jump in. So I've looked at so if you look at the entire budget of NSA, so this is Chris Monroe said NSA does not want a quantum computer. But if you looked at the entire budget of NSA, assume it's 100% goes to quantum computing, these stocks are still huge shorts because you don't know which company will get that. It's roughly 10 billion. So let's assume it doubles because of quantum computing. It's 20 billion. You don't know which company is going to get that 20 billion. Will it be Rigetti? Will it be D-Wave? Will it be IonQ? Will it be IBM? Will it be Google? Will it be PsiQuantum? Will it be Inflection? Will it be Alice and Bob? Nobody knows. There's 50 quantum startups, and who's in the lead now and who wins are two very, very different things. And right now, IBM's in the lead. Quantinuum is number 2.
Well, and then you have Willow, and you have all these
Google and some other
closeted
guys.
programs within larger players
Yeah,
that are
but
arguably better talent.
truth be told, I think number 1 is IBM and number 2 is Quantinuum. That's my opinion. If you have a different opinion, that's fine. But I would put the probability of IBM winning at 10% or 15, 20%, Quantinuum at 10%. Number 3, I would say maybe Google at 8%, and I would go down that list. And somewhere on that list, IonQ is 5% or something like that. Now, even in your most bullish dreams, you couldn't say that it's anything more than 20 or 30% because there's so many companies, right? And you have NSA who wants this, who doesn't want this. Let's assume they want it, and let's assume we double the budget, and we assume that it all goes. Every person at NSA, every storage drive, every computer that they have is all gone. and it's just replaced with quantum computers, which we know can't happen. NSA is not going to stop employing people. They're not going to stop doing research. They're not going to stop storing our phone calls and emails.
It's also limited. It's limited use case too. So it's like you can't even make that argument, right? Like
Yeah,
quantum
but you know,
computers can't.
imagine for whatever reason that they do it. You're talking about 20 billion, which again we agree is impossible. But the probability adjusted value of that 20 billion would be 6 billion in revenue. Again, assuming a wildly optimistic 30% kind of winner take all scenario, that's 6B in revenue. And that's years from now, right? That's not tomorrow. That's when these
That's like terminal.
yeah, that's when these machines work, which is, be optimistic and say it's in 5 years. So what's 6 billion worth in 5 years? Well, maybe it's a billion in cash flow. So all of these assumptions, if you make them, and they're kind of tremendously outlandish assumptions, you get to a fair value for IonQ. That's what would have to happen for IonQ to be fair valued, not a long, not a short, but just normal value of what it is today. The NSA would have to convert their entire presence, every person, every computer, every storage disk, everything, to 100% quantum. IonQ would have to win 30% of that. It would have to happen within 5 years, and that's what would have to happen for IonQ to be fairly valued, not a long, not 100x, just fairly valued. And again, you could say, well, I think that's going to happen, even though it's crazy. And not only that, but we're going to have other uses too. Forget just NSA, where you have this great Shor's algorithm, we can crack Chinese secrets or something like that. But we're also going to maybe sell some of those to the Brits. Maybe we'll also, start to think about scientific applications. Now, again, the scientific science sort of instrument market is not very big. Jensen said, what you don't have is a computer, you have an instrument, which I agree with. But assume that instrument market's very big, and you get another 20% of it. Let's say it's a $10 billion market, and you get 20% of that. That's another $2 billion. And you get that over 10 years. And that's 400 million in cash flow. Add that to the billion in cash flow from NSA. You're still not looking at some attractive stock. You're looking at kind of a very modest long. And again, we're making wild assumptions about that are very much impossible to achieve. But with those wild assumptions, maybe you can get IonQ to this price, maybe. And again, the odds that all this will happen are really very close to zero, but assume it's the case anyway. And I think that's the way I look at value. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I would agree with that. I mean, I would kind of dial it in a little further to, if you're looking at these companies, you take them off the public market, forget about what the stock price is, because there's obviously disagreement on that. And you sit down with the founders and you look at their tech to the extent that they could demonstrate it. I think probably as a, forget about bull or bear, just as an objective, I would say, if you want to take a flyer, you might have a couple $100 million in value there, depending on the cash on the books, depending on the immediate capital needs. And I would say that would be the way that I would look at it. And I'd be curious to see how a bull would look at it and how they would actually back that into their view against a similar objective standard.
Well, yeah, maybe we can find a bull. I know there's some people here who've been waiting. Let's talk to Surfer Stockabra, very serious guy here. Surfer, how are you?
Hey, Martin. Thanks for bringing me up. I have a question with respect to quantum sensing. I don't know if you heard about that or this new SPAC called CCCX. Um, a lot of people on Twitter are kind of commenting on it, saying it's different than quantum computing. And I don't know if you've delved into any research on that side. So thanks for your comments if you have any.
Yeah, quantum sensing is very different, obviously, from quantum computing. I know a lot about computing. I don't know a lot about sensing. So I'm just going to sit that one out. One of the, I think, strengths I have is I really don't try to bullshit anybody. Eric Jackson is bullish on Open Door, which took me 2 weeks to even remotely understand what it does after interviewing dozens of people that worked at Open Door. And it still is a mystery to me what this company really is all about. And then he's also bullish on quantum, which is one of the most difficult things to learn in all of life. And I've been studying it my whole life. And it's still really difficult. And then he's also bullish on biotech, which I also studied my whole life and think I have mastered. I haven't quite mastered quantum computing or anything, but I'm not just somebody that's going to spout out on something he doesn't understand, because it's a great way to embarrass yourself, and I'd rather not do that. So sorry, I can't help you on quantum sensing. Let's go to Billo. Billo, 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 Bilo. see if we can get Ben. Ben, what's up? Ben, you hear me? Take you up.
Apologies, sorry, the mic was
What's up?
muted. Can you run quantum calculations concurrently on the same computer or with cloud?
When you say concurrently, define.
Like you and I run a program on the same computer through the cloud at D-Wave.
My
at the same time.
understanding is no.
And the amount of bits would be essentially the letters in your name
Well,
in terms of the total bandwidth?
it's however many. Yeah, I mean you have to compile the circuit, and there is a bit limit naturally. So when you load, can you go on mute real quick?
Me?
I mean the guy with the siren in his background.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You have to have 700 people listen to the siren. I think if you try to load a 200-digit number, it's very, very hard to do that on an 80-bit computer or a 200-bit number, 256-bit number, which is 77 digits. No, that doesn't fit on an 80-bit, quantum computer.
So the bandwidth, the ability to actually compute anything with large scale, large data sets is basically pointless with quantum.
Yeah, that's not what it was made for. It was made to do these combinatorial searches across this block sphere, BLOCH. Bloch was a physicist, and one of the best ways to get intuition around quantum is to learn about this block sphere.
So quantum internet and all this nonsense is this hype game because there's not enough actual bandwidth to compute all that data.
Well, quantum internet's a little different. So quantum computing is my super strength. I really think I understand it. Quantum internet's weird. Quantum internet proposes that you can make a security guarantee that's not available in other communication channels. So the Alice and Bob archetype, in Alice and Bob open a quantum communication channel, Eve, the eavesdropper, if Eve listens to the channel breaks, or Alice and Bob are notified. That is actually not possible in any other communications channel that I think we know of. So quantum internet does propose a unique product there. Now, you can imagine the places where you would need that level of security. And furthermore, with post-quantum cryptography, you can just do the traditional encryption, which has worked really, really well. Right now we're encrypting with RSA and ECC, which could be breakable by a quantum computer should it ever occur. But I can upgrade today to post-quantum cryptography, and even if you tried to eavesdrop, all you would get is the garbled, encrypted, post-quantum kind of payload, and that post-quantum payload would be useless to you because you couldn't decrypt it under any means. So I think that level, the idea of quantum communication is almost as cool as Shor's, because it really did provide that first ever two parties on a channel could actually have perfect communication, which is, if you think about it, kind of like a bit of a revolution in information theory and other communications protocols. But again, it's kind of one of these things where it's like, how do I turn that into a business? That's not really that clear.
The last thing, Martin, and then I'll step back. I sent you a message about this. If you're a failed company like MicroStrategy or GME, and you decide you want to buy an asset to basically fund your future product development with convertible arbitrage, so using Bitcoin, for example, would D-Wave take their current market cap and do the same thing? Is that a concern for you?
No, I mean, D-Wave is a company that has a machine, they call it an annealer. The annealer, similar to all the other sort of quantum machines out there, has very low fidelity, so it can't actually perform useful calculations. And if a failed company wants to change its business model, it can do so. But I think it usually does so at its own peril because it alienates shareholders that currently believe in the business. So right now, there's people who believe in quantum computing. Now, if D-Wave were to go to 10 cents and pivot, that's another story. But if D-Wave were to pivot now, I think that would be a disaster because the shareholders of D-Wave believe that revenue is around the corner, that revenue is about to explode, that people love quantum annealing, when it's largely in the quantum community has been completely outcast as a joke. IonQ and Rigetti, I will give them their due. If they can make a fault-tolerant, general computer, it would be very impressive. So far, that's not been the case, but at least they're trying. D-Wave is not trying to do that. D-Wave is just a pile of garbage, and everyone in the quantum world, from Preskill to Aronson to others, have shit on D-Wave, and it's not even worth, obviously, sort of even being in this conversation. So, let alone QUBT, or any other thing with the name quantum in it that doesn't actually do the quantum computer, which is the raison d'etre for this space, is to build something that can take advantage of quantum effects like superposition to actually make computation. All right, this has been really interesting and fun. I'm curious what Variant has to say. Variant? Okay. Maybe not. running out of energy here. We'll do this again. Bilo, I see you. I tried to add you. Something went wrong there. Thanks, guys. This has been fun.
Thanks, Martin. Really appreciate it.
Oh, Variant, do you have anything to say?
Hey, Martin. I love the Godel terminal, by the way.
Thank you.
It's really useful. And I like what you're doing, Mark. Thank you for creating thoughtful dialogue in the markets.
Thanks.
I hope Godel becomes better over time and overtakes Bloomberg. I'll be honest, Martin, this whole quantum thing still kind of goes over my head. I keep hearing about qubits and superposition and how it's all supposed to revolutionize computing, but I can't quite wrap my head around what that means in practice. Like if you've just got one qubit, just a single one, what does that actually do? Does it have any real value on its own? Can it perform a calculation, store information, anything tangible?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Theoretically, everything a bit can do, a qubit can do. So at base level, you have that parity, which is good. You get new gates other than just and or and so forth. You get these new gates like a Toffoli gate or a Hadamard gate, and you get to use those gates to potentially try to do things that a normal computer can't do. So far, that's been pretty elusive, but hope springs eternal. Anyway, thanks for the comments. See you guys later.